There's a photograph no one in the family talks about. It was taken in 1847 in a farmhouse outside Charleston, South Carolina. The man in the center is sitting perfectly still. His hands are folded, his eyes are light, almost colorless, and if you look closely at the faces around him, his brothers, his sons, his nephew standing in the back, you'll see it. The same eyes, the same pale, unsettling stare, they all have it. Every single one of them. By 1920, that same look appeared in a police report in Tennessee. A man arrested for reasons the document doesn't fully explain, but his mugshot is there, and those eyes, they're unmistakable. In 1973, a wedding photo in Oklahoma, the groom, smiling beside his bride, has them too. Same shade, same shape, same strange, empty quality that makes you feel like you're looking at something that shouldn't be passed down. But it was. For 500 years, this trait moved through one family like a curse they couldn't name. It wasn't just physical, it came with something else, something the family tried to bury. Something that showed up again and again in hospital records, in letters never sent, in attics no one was allowed to enter. This is not a story about genetics. It's a story about what happens when a bloodline carries more than just resemblance. When it carries memory, when it carries damage, when it carries a secret so old, the family forgot it was even there, until it surfaced again, in the faces of children who had no idea what they'd inherited. You're about to hear what no one wanted you to know, and once you do, you'll understand why they tried so hard to keep it quiet. The family name was Dalhart, and in 1524, they weren't in America yet. They were in a small village outside Normandy, France. That's where the records begin, not with pride, not with honor, with a trial. A man named Etienne Dalhart was brought before the church council on charges no one alive today would believe. They said he'd spoken to something in the woods. They said his children had the same look in their eyes as he did. Pale, distant, wrong. The church didn't burn him. They did something worse. They let him live. They let him marry. They let him pass it on. By 1620, the Dalharts were on a ship to the New World. Colonial records show a family of 6 arriving in Virginia. The father's name was recorded as Samuel Dalhart. His occupation, landowner, his appearance, unremarkable, except for a single note written in the margin by the ship's clerk. Eyes unlike any I have seen, unnerving in their color. Samuel's children all had them too. And within 2 generations, the Dalharts had spread across the South. They owned land, they built homes, they married into other families, and everywhere they went, that trait followed, but so did something else. In 1703, a letter surfaced from a woman named Abigail Dalhart, written to her sister in Maryland. She never sent it. It was found decades later, folded inside a Bible. In it, she describes her husband, Samuel's grandson, as a man who does not sleep as others do. She writes that he would stand in the hallway at night, staring at nothing, that their children had begun doing the same, that she feared the house itself had become sick. She ends the letter with a single line, "I do not think this comes from him. I think it came before him." She was right. By the time the Dalharts reached the 1800s, they were everywhere. Census records show them in South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama. But medical records from that era tell a different story. In 1834, a doctor in Charleston wrote about treating a Dalhart family for what he called melancholic inheritance. He noted that multiple members across generations experienced the same symptoms: insomnia, detachment, and what he described as a gaze that seems to look through rather than at. He recommended isolation. The family refused. They kept marrying, they kept having children, and the gene, whatever it was, kept moving. By 1889, the Dalharts had done what most American families do. They scattered. Some went west, some stayed south. A few ended up in the northern industrial cities, working in factories, trying to disappear into the noise of progress. But the gene didn't disappear, it followed them. And so did the pattern. In a small town in eastern Tennessee, a schoolteacher named Margaret Dalhart wrote in her diary about her son. He was 7 years old. She described him as intelligent, obedient, and unnervingly quiet. She wrote that he would sit for hours without moving, staring at the wall, that he didn't cry when he fell, that he didn't laugh when the other children played. She took him to a doctor. The doctor examined him and found nothing physically wrong. But he asked her a question that stayed with her the rest of her life. He asked if anyone else in her family had ever been like this. She said yes, her father, her uncle, her grandfather. The doctor closed his notebook and told her there was nothing he could do. He said some things run deeper than medicine. In 1902, a census taker in rural Georgia made a note beside the Dalhart family entry. He wrote that the household contained 6 people, all of whom had the same peculiar lightness of eye and affect. He added that the children seemed older than their years. When he returned 5 years later, 3 of those children were gone, no death certificates, no records of where they went, just gone. The remaining family members wouldn't speak about it. The census taker didn't ask twice. In 1918, during the influenza pandemic, a nurse working in an Alabama field hospital encountered a soldier named Thomas Dalhart. He'd been injured in France and sent home to recover. She wrote in her log that he barely responded to pain, that when she changed his bandages, he watched her hands with a blank, glassy stare. She wrote that it reminded her of something she'd seen once in an asylum. She asked him if he was all right. He said yes, but his voice, she wrote, sounded like it was coming from somewhere far away. When she checked on him the next morning, he was gone. He'd walked out in the middle of the night, still bleeding, and no one ever saw him again. The family kept no unified records. They didn't gather for reunions. They didn't write family histories. But if you go through the archives, hospital records, court documents, old newspapers, you start to see it. The same name, the same eyes, the same cold, unreachable quality that people noticed but couldn't explain. And in every generation there were disappearances, people who walked away and never came back, people who were declared dead without a body, people the family just stopped talking about. In 1954, a psychiatrist named Dr. Harold Voss published a paper in a small medical journal out of Kentucky. It wasn't widely read. Most copies were thrown away or filed in basement archives of university libraries, but the paper was about something he called familial dissociative inheritance. He didn't name the family. He didn't have to. He described a multigenerational case study involving a bloodline he'd been tracking for nearly a decade. He wrote about children born with what he called an absence of emotional grounding. He described adults who functioned normally in society, held jobs, raised families, attended church, but who reported feeling as though they were watching their own lives from a distance, as though they weren't really there. He noted that every individual he studied had pale eyes, light gray or blue so faint it looked almost white in certain light. He noted that they all described the same dreams, empty fields, long hallways with no doors. The sense of being followed by something they couldn't see. He wrote that trauma in most families fades over time, but in this family it didn't fade, it deepened, it became structural. He theorized that something had happened generations ago, something so catastrophic that it had altered the way the family experienced reality, and that alteration had been passed down, encoded not just in behavior, but in biology. Dr. Voss died in 1961. His research was never continued, but his notes were found in 2003, tucked inside a file cabinet in an abandoned clinic. In those notes, he mentioned meeting with a woman in her 70s. She was a Dalhart. She told him her grandfather used to say the family was marked, that something had been done to them a long time ago, and that they'd never been able to shake it. She said her children had the eyes. Her grandchildren, too. She said she didn't know what it meant, but she knew it wasn't normal. She told Dr. Voss she was afraid to have more children, afraid of what she might pass on. By the 1970s, the Dalharts were still spread across the country. But they'd started showing up in different kinds of records: psychiatric hospitals, addiction treatment centers, suicide reports. In 1976, a coroner in West Virginia wrote in his report about a man named Daniel Dalhart, found dead in his home at the age of 42. No signs of foul play, no drugs in his system. The coroner noted that the man's eyes were open when they found him. He'd been sitting in a chair, facing the window. The coroner wrote that it looked like he'd simply decided to stop. Just stopped breathing, stopped living. The report was filed. The case was closed. No one asked why. In 1983, a journalist in Oklahoma began researching a story about inherited trauma. She'd heard rumors about a family with an unusual genetic trait tied to psychological patterns. She interviewed 3 members of the Dalhart family. All of them described the same thing: a feeling of not being fully present, a sense that something was always watching, a strange, lifelong awareness that they didn't belong to themselves. The journalist spent 2 years on the story. She never published it. When asked why, she said she didn't think people were ready to hear it. In 1999, a woman named Claire Dalhart went looking for answers. She was 34 years old. She had 2 children. Both of them had the eyes. Both of them had started showing the signs. Her daughter wouldn't sleep in her own room. Said she felt like someone was standing in the corner watching her. Her son had stopped speaking at school. The teachers said he just stared. Claire had grown up hearing whispers. Her grandmother used to say the family was cursed. Her father refused to talk about it. But Claire couldn't ignore it anymore. She started digging. She requested birth records, death certificates, census data going back 200 years. She contacted distant relatives she'd never met. Most of them wouldn't talk to her. A few did, and what they told her was always the same. The eyes ran in the family. So did the coldness. So did the feeling that something inside them had been switched off a long time ago. One cousin told her that his grandfather used to say the Dalharts weren't supposed to survive, that whatever happened to them in the old country should have ended the line, but it didn't. It just kept going. And every generation carried it forward. Claire found a journal in her grandmother's belongings after she died. It was written in 1941. Her grandmother had been 19. She wrote about visiting a family gathering in North Carolina. She described sitting at a dinner table with more than 20 Dalharts. She wrote that it felt wrong, that everyone looked too much alike, that the room was too quiet, that halfway through the meal, she realized no one was really talking to each other. They were just sitting there staring. She wrote that she left early and never went back. She wrote that she loved her family, but she was afraid of them. Claire kept researching. She found medical records from the 1920s describing a Dalhart child admitted to a state hospital in Virginia. The diagnosis, catatonia. The notes said the child would stand in one spot for hours, unresponsive, eyes open. The doctors couldn't explain it. The child was eventually released. No follow-up, no cure. Just sent home. Claire found another case from 1958. Another Dalhart, same symptoms, different state. She found 12 more cases across 4 decades. All of them Dalharts, all of them untreated, all of them released back into the world, back into the bloodline, back into the pattern. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Claire reached out to a geneticist in 2002. She wanted to know if this could really be inherited. If a family could carry trauma in their DNA, the geneticist told her that emerging research suggested it was possible that environmental trauma, especially sustained over generations, could alter gene expression. That stress, fear, and dissociation could become biological. That what happened to the Dalharts 500 years ago might still be living inside them, not as memory, as code. Claire stopped her research in 2004. She never said why, but in her last journal entry, she wrote something that still haunts anyone who's read it. She wrote, "I don't think we were meant to know. I think forgetting was the only mercy we ever had." Today, there are Dalharts living in 37 states. Most of them don't know each other. Most of them have never heard the full story. But if you ask them the right questions, they'll tell you things that sound familiar. They'll tell you about the eyes, about the dreams, about the feeling that something is missing inside them, about children who seem too still, too quiet, too aware. They'll tell you they've always felt like they were watching their own lives happen to someone else. In 2011, a man named Jacob Dalhart posted in an online genealogy forum. He was trying to trace his family tree. He mentioned the pale eyes. Within hours, he received messages from 11 different people. All of them Dalharts, all of them describing the same trait, the same patterns. One woman wrote that her therapist had told her she exhibited signs of dissociation, but she'd never experienced trauma. She said it felt like she was born that way. Another man wrote that his father used to tell him their family had been broken a long time ago, but he never explained what that meant. Jacob tried to organize a meeting. No one showed up. The thread was deleted a week later. No explanation given. In 2016, a documentary filmmaker reached out to several members of the Dalhart family. She wanted to make a film about inherited trauma. She conducted interviews, she gathered photos, she reviewed the research Claire had compiled years earlier, but halfway through production, the project was shelved. The filmmaker wouldn't say why. But in a private email obtained later, she wrote to a colleague, "I don't think this family wants to be found, and I don't think I should keep looking. There are photographs online now, if you know where to look." Family reunions from the 80s and 90s, wedding photos, school pictures, and if you scroll through them, you'll see it. Row after row of faces, different ages, different states, different decades. But the eyes are always the same, that pale, distant stare, the kind that makes you feel like the person in the photo is looking past the camera, past the moment, past everything. In 2019, a genetic testing company flagged an unusual pattern in their database. A cluster of users with shared ancestry all reported similar psychological traits in their health surveys: detachment, insomnia, a sense of unreality. The company contacted a research university to investigate. The university declined. The data was classified as inconclusive. The users were never contacted. But if you reference those user IDs with public genealogy records, they all trace back to the same root. A family that arrived in Virginia in 1620, a family that spread across a continent, a family that carried something no one wanted to name. There are still Dalharts being born today, in hospitals in Texas and Ohio and California. The doctors don't see anything wrong. The parents take them home, and in a few years, maybe 5, maybe 10, someone will notice the way the child stares, the way they don't react the way other children do, the way they seem to be somewhere else, even when they're standing right in front of you, and the parents will wonder if it's just a phase, if it'll pass, but deep down, if they know the history, they'll already know the answer. So what really happened? What was the original wound? What broke this family so completely that 500 years later, the fracture is still visible in the faces of their children? The truth is, no one knows. Not anymore. The records from 1524 are incomplete. The trial documents are fragments. The Church Council's verdict was never fully recorded. All we know is that Etienne Dalhart was accused of something the Church considered unforgivable, but not enough to kill him for. They let him live, they let him leave, and whatever happened in those woods outside Normandy, whatever he saw or did or became, it stayed with him, and it stayed with everyone who came after. There are theories. Some believe the family was part of a religious sect that practiced rituals the Church wanted erased. Others think they were victims, caught in something they didn't understand and blamed for it anyway. A few researchers have suggested that the Dalharts were subjected to psychological conditioning so severe it altered their neurology, that they were tortured, isolated, forced to witness or participate in things that shattered their sense of self. And that shattering became hereditary. But here's what we do know. Trauma doesn't just disappear. It doesn't fade because time passes. It lives in the body. It rewires the brain. It changes the way we sleep, the way we dream, the way we see the world. And if that trauma is deep enough, if it's sustained long enough, it doesn't stay with the person who experienced it. It gets passed down, not as a story, as a structure, as a biological inheritance that no one asked for and no one can escape. The Dalharts never had a choice. They were born into this, every single one of them, and for 5 centuries they've carried it. Some of them tried to fight it. Some of them tried to understand it. Most of them just lived with it, the way you live with a scar you've had so long you forget it's there. But it's always there, in the mirror, in the eyes of your children, in the dreams that don't feel like dreams, in the silence that fills the room when the family gathers and no one knows what to say. There are people alive right now who don't know they're part of this, who have never heard the name Dalhart because it was changed generations ago. Because someone in the family tried to run from it, tried to start over. But the gene doesn't care what your last name is. It doesn't care if you know the history. It just keeps moving, keeps showing up, keeps marking the bloodline, and maybe that's the most haunting part. Not that it happened, but that it's still happening right now, in living rooms and hospital nurseries and school classrooms across the country. Children are being born with those eyes, with that stillness, with that sense that something inside them is missing, and no one will tell them why, because no one really knows, because the origin is lost. Because the wound is so old, it's become invisible, but it's not gone. It never was. The Dalharts are still here, and so is whatever marked them, still carried, still inherited, still waiting in the blood of the next generation. A lineage that carried the same gene for 500 years, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice, and neither do the children being born today.